new documentary about Clarence Thomas is now in theaters. Even those who know something of the second African-American Supreme Court justice and his background are bound to learn some surprises. I recently spoke with Michael Pack, director, producer of Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words.
When I was 6, I wandered the streets by myself. You were hungry and didn't know when you'd eat. Someplace in my life, the road split off. I'd gone to the seminary. I'd gone to all-white schools. I was never going to be a part of that world. I was never going to be white. The problem is I could never go back completely to the world I came from.
I mean, it is a great story, a story of a Horatio Alger story of coming from nothing, from poverty and segregation to the highest court in the land.
The documentary traces Thomas's birth in 1948 to a poor Georgia family that spoke a form of Creole. His father left the family. Thomas often went hungry and had no bed to sleep in. His mother, working as a maid, gave her 2 sons to their grandfather to raise.
And that is what changed Justice Thomas's life. His grandfather gave him hard work and values. His grandfather was a Catholic, a rare thing for an African American in the 50s in Savannah, and sent him to parochial schools. And he thrived in that environment, and he even decided he wanted to become a priest. And he entered the seminary. Not that many people know that.
I didn't know that.
However, it was the late 60s, and the seminaries had been all white until very recently. He was one of the first African Americans to attend. And there he started to experience racism.
Disillusioned, Thomas says he ultimately left the seminary, which caused his grandfather to kick him out, and Thomas became a radical.
And so he became an angry black man, as he says. He suddenly felt race and racism explained everything. And he supported every person, the more radical, the better. Angela Davis, Huey Newton, Malcolm X. And then he gradually saw the errors of that. And that was the beginning of his coming back to both his faith and what he thinks of as the values of his grandfather and the nuns, and becoming conservative.
I saw what I had become, lashing out at every single thing. And I asked God that if you take anger out of my heart, I'll never hate again. And that was the beginning of the slow return to where I started.
Thomas went on to work for President Reagan, a conservative Republican.
I want my candidacy to unify our country.
I was under constant attack. You're not really black because you're not doing what we expect black people to do.
That I will nominate Judge Clarence Thomas to serve as Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
That's when all heck broke loose.
Judge Thomas began to use work situations to discuss sex.
We know exactly what's going on here. This is the wrong black guy. He has to be destroyed.
Did he reflect at all upon current events, such as the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, where, maybe not unlike Justice Thomas, sort of at the 11th hour, accusations were raised against Kavanaugh, a conservative nominee of the Trump court?
Well, in the interview, he did not want to reflect on other political issues, as is common for Supreme Court justices. But I agree with you, Sharyl. I think it's inconceivable that he can't have been flashing back to his own confirmation battle. The Kavanaugh hearing seemed to follow the Thomas playbook.
One of the things that is often said about Justice Thomas today is that he just sits back and doesn't really say much or necessarily do much with the court, just sort of lets it happen around him. What did you find?
There are a lot of myths about Justice Thomas, and that's one. For example, he's written over 600 opinions, 30% more than any other sitting Supreme Court justice. 30% more, not just a little bit more, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the others. He writes a lot. He doesn't speak an oral argument, and that makes people think he isn't active. But
Why
he is
doesn't
active.
he do that, do you think?
Part of the answer is definitely that he doesn't believe that that's the role of judges. Each advocate on each side of a case has 30 minutes to speak, and if judges ask questions that takes from their time, he thinks they should be allowed to make their presentation. But the real work, as Justice Thomas says, is when they write opinions and circulate opinions and talk among themselves. And he's very active in that way.
What does the whole story of Clarence Thomas to date say to you?
I think Thomas's story is one of resilience against a great deal of opposition. He's always coming back. And he refused to define himself as a victim, which he could easily have done.
So you'd still like to serve on the Supreme Court?
I'd rather die than withdraw. I wanted to be able to say I lived up to my oath and did my best.
At age 71, Justice Thomas is the longest serving among the current members of the Supreme Court at more than 28 years.